Remember when there were great sports fighting games, like when the WWE games were good and the Don King boxing games? Well, if you've been looking for something to itch that crave that was left behind by those titles, then UFC 4 will not only fill the void left behind, but it will reign supreme in sports simulated fighting games. It's been over 2 years since UFC 3 in 2018, and now we've got UFC 4, and while it may look like another game that's borrowed its fluoro colour pattern from Far Cry and FIFA 2020, it's actually really damn good, if not a little money hungry. UFC 4 is, well, a UFC fighting simulator game just like you think it is, but it's also much more than that. Well, not really, it's still a fighting game. If, like me, the only thing about UFC you know is Conor McGregor and that it's mixed martial arts, then UFC 4 will still appeal to you. You start off the game out like most simulators by creating a character who looks nothing like you in real life before learning how to fight. It's a bit like the Simpsons episode where Homer learns how to fight. You start off in low-level fights outside of the UFC with little to no crowd going up against no ones. Like most sports games, you'll get approached by a coach who in turn will teach you how the game works. From here, the game teaches you how to box, how to grapple, and so on. You'll learn how to perform these moves inside the gym before going up against an opponent in an octagon who uses these techniques. Before you know it, you'll have learnt the basic fundamentals of UFC 4, and then you'll go up against an opponent who uses all of these techniques against you. Depending on how you perform, the game will recommend a difficulty for you, which you can change at any time, and you'll eventually fight with Dana White in the crowd watching you. Perform well, and you'll move from street fights to the World Fighting Alliance, or WFA. If you perform well, and by that I mean win every fight in WFA, you'll skip the next feeder season and move straight into UFC. Perform well in the UFC, and your fame, your pay will get better and better as you keep going. It's basically a stepping system that keeps you hooked into playing one more round, and one more round. Once you're in the WFA, you'll then be told who your next opponent is, and you'll have to prepare for that opponent. There'll be a certain amount of weeks to get ready before the fight, and there's loads of things you can do to prepare yourself and your fans. Each week before the fight, and there's generally 4 to 5 weeks before fights, you'll be given weekly currency to use on actions. This currency can be used to study your opponents to see where their weaknesses are, their fighting styles, and their main attacks, and even hints like your opponent tucks in their chin for the first couple minutes of each round, making it harder to get in hits like uppercuts. You'll also be able to tweet to your fans to get them hyped, train in the gym and prepare your body and warm up, and even learn attacks from other UFC fighters. This system is actually pretty rad, and even had me somewhat studying my opponents and training against their fighting styles for upcoming matches. You'll even get tweets from your upcoming opponents, and you can decide how to react, whether to be respectful or call them out. Obviously, being respectful, you'll become friendly with them, and then you can learn some of their attacks after that fight, while calling them out will hype up the fight. Speaking of fighting, the combat in UFC 4 is damn satisfying. Each connecting hit to the head feels as satisfying as calling back Kratos' axe in God of War or Thor's hammer in Marvel's Avengers. For those of you who don't understand that reference, each hit is damn solid. Multiple times, not only during the capture for this review, but every round outside of the capture, I was reacting to not only the strikes I was making against my opponent, but applauding good shots made against me. Unlike the Mortal Kombat or Injustice, yes I know they're the same series, but button mashers will not really enjoy UFC. Just like my favourite simulator game, Formula 1 2020, UFC is the same in regards to you need to spend some time with it. Smashing attack buttons will drain your stamina. Continuing to attack with no stamina will then drain the pool that the stamina recharges from, meaning you won't be making any powerful attacks without being pushed over. To make another Simpsons analogy, you'll basically be the bums that Homer pushes over when he's boxing.
Hit him back!
That cactus is right.
You need to think who your opponent is and what their tactics are. Going up against the boxer, go with grapples and kicks. Notice that they keep blocking their head when you come in close, go for the ribs.
Go for the ribs! Don't let that bastard breathe!
That isn't to say though that UFC isn't accessible. The start of UFC 4 with learning how to fight with your character you've made will teach you how to play the game, and putting the difficulty on easy mode, you'll rarely if ever lose a fight. UFC 4 gets really interesting when you're going up against a skilled opponent, like Conor McGregor or GSP, and they won't go down as easy as the starter fighters you go up against. Going into the third round with both fighters low on stamina and bleeding all over the mat, where any waste of stamina can mean the difference between a win or a loss, is intense. Just like all simulator games, you can start off with an easier difficulty, then once you start to master that, slowly ramp it up until you master that difficulty, and so on. Before you know it, no one will be able to go up against you. Both you and your opponent will have stamina bars at the top, but also damage bars that will appear when you strike that relevant area.
Good job of mixing it up,
Deal too much damage to one area and one side of the screen will go red, and the relevant fighter's stamina bar will drop and they'll start to sway. Deal some damage during this time, your opponent won't be able to block and you can just flat knock them out. Give them time to recover will extend the fight if you didn't want to go for a simple knockout. Now, depending on how the fight goes can depend on how the public and the fans react. Some of your fans will be ecstatic that you just walked into the octagon and instantly knocked out your opponent, while others will say the fight is rigged or be upset for spending too much money on a quick fight. Control-wise, I could pair UFC 4 to, say, the Batman Arkham series. There are 4 face buttons on the controller with the relevant arm and leg attacks, but combining these with the relevant triggers and shoulder buttons will have you perform different actions. For example, on Xbox, if I pulled the left bumper and hit B and Y at the same time, my fighter would do a jumping roundhouse kick. Pulling the left trigger, the right bumper and Y, I'd do a flying cage Superman elbow. You'll learn these moves from fellow UFC fighters and they'll put you in the gym against them to practice the move and the button combination multiple times. Graphically, UFC 4 is pretty good. The character creation at first seemed a little basic, but after spending, and look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, after spending an hour creating my character, I was pretty happy with how my character looked. In the menus, your character model looks kinda meh, but seeing them in the octagon covered in blood and sweat, shit dude. When not only in-game character models, but your custom characters are sweaty as fuck, and they do a fast attack, you can see a mist of sweat spray away from their body, and holy shit, it looks amazing. If you get your opponent covered in blood, seeing the spray of blood not only on them but the mat as you keep striking them and seeing it on your gloves and your shorts is pretty rad. After my rounds against McGregor, seeing his face busted and the commentators, well, commentating on the damage he'd taken really immerses you into the sim. Hearing a fist or a foot connect to a head or a knee to the ribs is a solid knocking sound while the crowd and commentators react to it. After each fight in UFC 4 2, the loading screen to go back to the career menu is Instagram footage of your fans watching your fight, and it's actually pretty cool to see your fighter either win or lose from a fan's perspective.
Isn't Dad the one in the black trunks? No. Uh-oh. What am I missing? What?
While UFC 4 is not only a beautiful and creative fighting sim, there are some issues I had with it. For starters, just like most games released in the past couple of years, there are microtransactions. Now though, EA have learnt their lesson from Battlefront 2 and microtransactions are only used for unlocking different coloured shorts, gloves, taunts, entrances and victory emotes. You'll start off with a couple, but if you want something that doesn't make your fighter seem like a giant douche, then you need to either grind away to get gold coins, which is used to unlock items, or use microtransactions. Now it's worth noting there is a leveling up system in place that by winning matches, for fulfilling sponsorship contracts and other side objectives, these will help you level up. You'll level up roughly though the same rate you will at something like Battlefield or Battlefront. Roughly about 6 or 7 hours of solid gameplay will get you about 6 levels. Every time you level up, you'll have a chance of unlocking cosmetic items and character card title crap. Basically that customization shit you get when you play COD when you get a background base and a logo and a quote for your character card. So basically pointless shit. It's a little bit like the NBA 2K games, especially last year's one. In 2K20, if you wanted your player to even wear something as simple as a pair of Converse on the court, you either need to grind away to unlock it or spend real money. Also, while most of the combat is great, the grapple and ground combat is fucking awful. Getting either lifted to the ground or flat up thrown to the ground, you'll have 3 options in basic mode. Submit, which if you're on top, you'll start to go into submission moves, or if you're on the bottom, you'll submit to the attacker. Ground and pound, where you'll try and get on top and just start smashing the fuck out of them, or escape and push off. However, to do any of these actions, it will use a fuck ton of stamina, whether you're attacking or defending. I've seen my stamina bar drop faster than a coke hall dropping to his or her knees for a 5-gram line. Now UFC 4 will briefly teach you this, the ground combat, not dropping to your knees for a line of coke. And for a mode with so many zones and paths to go down, I feel like this mode either needed more of a dedicated training mode or it needs to be made even more simpler. I've also done rounds against grapplers and split their heads open and knocked their shit around, where out of nowhere they've charged me and thrown me against the wall and onto the ground, while it seems like they were barely conscious beforehand. Also, if you're on the receiving end of a ground and pound, your only options are to block, or sway left, or sway right. You think there'd be an option to grab an arm and do something besides getting hit. Again, it could be due to UFC 4 dropping you in the deep end with ground combat, but comfortably teaching you striking attacks. Now I'd upgraded and prepared my fighter that any time I'd go against a grappler or a ground attacker, I'd fire off heavy hits to the head to weaken them up and disable them before they could even try that shit. Finally, UFC 4 is a fantastic fighting game, but it's not an arcade game. No shit. So playing against friends on the couch will be a little difficult, seeing as you'll generally have more experience than them and you know what the buttons are. That's not to say it won't be great playing against friends, but inexperienced friends are gonna hate having the shit kicked out of them.
Finally, he found the one that hit the exact sweet spot that ended his opponent's night.
UFC 4 is not only a beautiful and outstanding fighting sim, but it had me going just one more game in 3-hour stints. The gameplay is solid, and if you're a striking fan, then you're gonna love kicking the shit out of a grappler before they get the chance to take you down to the ground. As the last UFC game on current gen consoles, it looks pretty damn good. The atmosphere of the arena, the sound of gloves hitting noses, and the crowds roaring will get any fans, big or small, immersed. While I do have some issues with the ground combat and the microtransactions, it doesn't really get in the way of me beating the shit out of opponents. UFC 4 not only fills the void left behind by the good WWE games of old and the old EA boxing games, but I think it's the best EA sports game on the market. And yes, I do mean it's better than FIFA. If you enjoyed this video, a comment, a like, a share, or a subscribe would be a great way of helping me and my new channel out. If you have any questions about UFC 4, hit me up in the comments below. But if you want to hear more, tune in to this week's episode of the Shaken Not Noob podcast. The link will be in the description below for anyone interested.